Hey guys, this is James.
And this is Danny from TDB bringing you guys episode 168. And today we're going to be talking about raw puer basics.
Yep. So we've done a couple basic episodes, I think, for green tea and for white tea. Gaiwans, they've been some of our most successful episodes. We do a lot of episodes on puer, but we've actually never done a puer basics.
Right.
It's one of our most frequently requested episodes. So today we're just going to be talking about raw puer.
Yes. So first things first, we're just going to be talking about the creation of raw puer, why raw puer exists, and a little bit of the processing behind it, and then we're going to go ahead and brew and then show you guys the differences between age of raw puer visually. So, James, you want to start us off a little bit with what is raw puer like in terms of the processing?
Mm-hmm. So raw puer itself is processed very similar to green tea, except in the kill green, they don't kill it all the way, well, unless it's poorly processed. And the reason that they do that is so that you don't kill all the enzymatic activity, which is a word that makes me sound smart, of the tea. And so you can sort of have like the little critters in there interacting, and so the tea can be alive.
Right. So, and the reason why raw puer and puer came to be in the first place was because tea itself, as you can tell, is a very voluminous. The raw dry leaves are very voluminous. The processed dry leaves are very voluminous, and it was originally very hard to transfer to move the huge parcels of tea across the country, especially when they didn't have horses. It was just by throwing a bunch of tea on your back. So what they realized is if we press this tea, it will become more compact. What a surprise. But as a result of reducing the volume, they were able to transport so much more tea. Part of the transportation process is that the tea needs to ferment in order to prevent other stuff from growing in it. And so raw puer and puer period is a fermented tea. There is, like James said, enzymatic and fungal and bacterial living processes happening in this stuff. And that's some of the reasons why people think that it's good for digestion. That's generally a healthy tea, that maybe it has a little bit less caffeine content as well. It probably is more of a function of age, but nevertheless.
And I'll also add that, like, while puer is heavily associated with being pressed and stuff like that, it doesn't necessarily have to be pressed. That's not inherent in the definition of puer.
Absolutely. At all. But most cases where you're going to be buying puer, you probably are going to be buying a cake or a brick or a tuo or other pressed forms of the puer. The way that it's pressed doesn't have a huge impact on the flavor of it. Probably the amount that you have pressed into one object would have more of an impact overall.
And it also is a regional specific tea, similar to Darjeeling, because Darjeeling is actually a place. So puer is grown in Yunnan, which is a province in China. It's quite actually far from the other areas of China where they do grow tea. So the tea is inherently just a little bit different than Fujian or somewhere where they're growing lots of white teas or oolongs or green teas.
Right. And not that people haven't made puer from other regions in other countries, in other tea growing areas, just that in the same way that champagne is made from a certain area, technically puer is from a certain area.
And that's what you would call border tea, is something that is from, like, it could be very close. It could be from like Myanmar or Vietnam, somewhere that borders Yunnan. So, and processed in the exact same way. But technically, if we are to use the cut and dry definition of puer, it would not be technically puer.
Right. Now, a couple of things we can sort of quickly talk about with puer is that for you folks out there who don't know, puer does, at least in today's market, appreciate in value if it's a high quality puer, meaning that if it gets older and older and the quality maintains and it has enough kind of credibility and prestige, the actual value of the cake itself will increase over time. So there is this whole economy of puer, puer investments, the puer bubble, all sorts of other interesting little sections of pu'er history that are old and contemporary that you guys can learn more about on our website, tdb.org. Check us out. A bunch of great articles there.
Yeah.
But I think we've covered most of the basics for raw pu'er in terms of explaining the history of it and how it's produced.
Yeah.
If you folks have other questions in the comments, leave them in the comments below.
Yep.
But now let's maybe brew up some tea.
Yeah,
Talk a little bit about brewing parameters.
Let's do it.
Cool.
We are going to get brewing. And I think another interesting part about pu'er is that it's heavily tied with sort of like the popularity of pu'er is heavily tied with the popularity of gongfu tea too. And brewing young pu'er especially, I think gongfu is very necessary, or far more necessary, just because you're able to control your steepings a little bit better.
Sure.
Yeah.
So as opposed to throwing this in a teacup and sipping on it over time, the steep times of pu'er will have a large impact on the experience of the pu'er.
So anyone that's tossed, 7 or 8 grams of young pu'er into a pot and let that guy go for about 45 seconds, you will have Denny's reaction on your face.
Yeah, you might just be in the bathroom vomiting.
Yeah.
Depending.
Yeah, if you actually chug it or something. So from my left, right here, to that right, we have a young tea. This is the 2013 Shuangxi from Shizahao sample that was sent to us. So it's a relatively young tea. It's just 3 years old at this point. Right here we have 2004 Jianshen Tool. So this tea on the left was a Bing Cha, which is cake. This is Tool Cha, which is mushroom shaped.
Yep.
Or not mushroom shaped, rather bird's nest, I should say. And here we have the Yongxinhao Mekong brick. So that was formed into what they call a Zhuan. And so it's from 1999. So here's our older tea.
Good.
And so we will give these a rinse, which is pretty normal for pu'er brewing. And in general, what would you recommend as far as like parameters for steeping?
Yeah, great question. So I like to do basically right off of the boil water. I like to do about anywhere from 3 to 6 grams per 100 milliliter gaiwan or 100 milliliter brewing vessel, depending on the tea and how I want to brew it and how fast it's going to go and just how much tea I have. So I would definitely be limited by the amount of tea I also have. And you're going to do a quick rinse like what James is doing right now. That's going to be mostly to get rid of some of the sort of gunk and sediment. Let's be honest, this tea is old and it's been hanging out for a while. So we do want to rinse it off a little bit. Also, especially with our oldest tea here that's been from a hard-pressed brick, it's important to be able to steep these teas long enough that they start to moisten and soak all the way through and actually get the tea leaves hydrated so we can get to the tea itself. So right now, you're not going to see a huge variety in the color of the teas. Had this tea been in 2016, it might be a little bit more yellow here, for instance. But it's actually looking pretty, all the tea colors looking pretty similar.
Yep.
But we'll see as we brew these out that they will change pretty dramatically.
And I'm actually going to give these just a second rinse too, just to, like kind of Denny said, to get a little bit to the gist of the tea a little bit faster.
And so with your high-end raws where you've aged them for a while and you're spending $10 a cup, and having serving the tea as a treat, you don't have to rinse twice, but
yeah, and I think for us it's more of the case of just getting to the gist of the tea. Like Denny said, this brick and this tool are still coming apart a little bit, so I just want to be able to speed that process up just a little bit.
And for you folks out there who are getting into raw pu'er and are feeling intimidated because you can't pronounce any of the words, don't worry, I'm right there with you. I don't really worry about knowing that a brick versus a cake versus a 2-0 bird's nest sort of. I don't worry about The names, you don't have to worry about the names. It's great to know the names.
Except when I give you a pop quiz.
It's true. Every Tuesday at 7 a.m. he calls me. It's so annoying.
It's like your tone of the tuocha is wrong.
Actually,
my tone is probably wrong, so I do not give Denny those quizzes.
That's also true. In terms of brewing parameters, James, what I've given my spiel about what I'd like to do. How about you? What are your preferences for brewing parameters?
Yeah, I would say for raw pour, when you're starting out, keep it short, keep it at a flash steep, and as far as the actual leaf that you're using, I think that varies. I think Denny and I would have different answers for what we both do.
Mm-hmm.
I use about, for every 15 milliliters, I use about a gram of leaf.
Okay.
So if it's a 75 milliliter Gaiwan, I would use 5 grams.
Right.
If it was 90, I would use 6 grams.
Got it. Great.
Yeah. What about yourself?
It's sort of around that range, more or less.
And so this is the 2013
Right,
tea.
this is the young.
So you can definitely tell the difference in how they smell.
You can also notice in the color of the leaves that the younger leaves are going to look a little bit more verdant and green. Ooh, wow, this is really smoky.
Mm-hmm.
Spicy. That's great.
So the first tea has a lot more of the crisper floral flavors to it. This one has a little bit of fruit, a little bit of smoke, very pungent, as Denny said, and this one is earthier.
Earthy and more medicinal and more Chinese herb shop kind of a thing. And so one of the questions that I'm sure folks will have is, why are we using Gaiwans versus Yixing or clay pots? When and under what circumstances would you be using Yixing? Is there a advantage one or the other? What's your preference there, James?
For pu'er, I would say, you can really use whatever. If you do not want to spend the maximum amount of money and you are just getting started, go with the Gaiwan. For our sakes, we're also doing comparisons, so using a somewhat neutral device, a Gaiwan is a good way to go in that sense. So, generally speaking, the teas that will perform a little bit better with clay tend to be ones that you can brew a little bit longer. So things like this tea that I'm brewing right now would maybe do just fine in a clay pot.
And that might be a function of the retained heat, and is it a matter of the cake being pressed harder, retaining the heat, and that accelerating the brewing process, or why would you prefer a clay pot for the older?
Well, in general, it's just these teas, to really bring them out fully, the tea will just really mellow with age. So the young tea, as we'll talk about in a second, will have a lot more of that youthful energy and stuff like that. Perhaps more bitter, not necessarily.
Right.
More astringent. It'll just be stronger. And so you really, to moderate that, you usually want to keep it, like you'll use a Gaiwan, you'll keep the steeps very, very short.
Right.
Until the tea starts to die a little bit. Right. Older teas, you can push a little bit more. They might be a little bit more forgiving in how they brew. And I think that's also one of the reasons why people can get very different opinions on young tea. Because if you brew a young tea for a flash steep versus 10 seconds, they can taste very different.
Really different.
Yeah. And that's not that much in time.
Yep.
So why don't we get drinking?
Cool. And one other thing to keep in mind here, folks, is that don't let teaware get in the way of enjoying yourself. Don't let a price tag get in the way of enjoying yourself. If you never had a raw pu'er before, there's tons of great resources on cost-effective ways of trying your first raw and rye pu'er. So check us out on TDBD for more information about that.
Yep.
But what are we drinking right now, James?
So this is the 2013 Xuanqi from Shiza Hao. So
let's give it a shot.
Cheers.
It's light.
It's bitter.
It's a little bitter. It's it just tastes younger. It has more crisp notes. It's got more vegetal,
more floral, greener in general, and we can smell too. Smelling a lot of the same things, maybe a little bit of grassy notes in there.
Totally. Yep. Now, we normally don't do a pu'er session like this. And we're going to be high as kites after this. Let's be real. But so you folks at home who you do want to, when you want to brew your tea, this is a fun way of doing it though, where you have a comparison. You really get to experience the category itself. So would encourage you guys to check it out. Do it this way.
I think a lot of tasting is very comparative, so doing it like this will emphasize the differences in the teas.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.
Smokier, a little peaty.
Definitely peaty. Almost has sort of those Yunnan black charcoal smokiness going on that I like a lot.
It's smooth at first, and then it gets very peaty and very strong and very pungent in the mouth. And to our last tea, the Mekong.
And we're not really noticing a huge difference in the color of these quite yet. That will become more apparent. I think that we might not have even picked a young enough tea.
Yeah, I think so too, actually.
Funnily enough.
I mean, it'll brew up generally a clearer yellow, lighter color.
It looks it looks a little bit more yellow than that.
This tea has a little bit of age on it.
It does have a little bit, but some of these teas are made to be drank young, some of them are made to be aged. So know what you're getting into when you order it and order accordingly.
Yeah, and I would say in accordance to this, well, let's taste this tea first.
Yeah, cheers.
Smoother, basically no bite to this tea.
Yeah. It's so obvious.
Nice mellow body.
The age, it's interesting tasting this way because the age becomes so much more clear in a relative sense. It's hard to define what the taste of age is in tea. It's almost like a sort of defining a gap of something. But this it becomes more obvious as we're going further away. So
earthier, maybe a little bit of menthol. That's what I'm getting from this. But on the topic of this third tea, which is from 1999, so this tea was actually stored in Taiwan. So pu'er would technically be classified as a heicha, a dark tea.
Right.
And originally one of the export groups that it's really known for being sent to is the Cantonese. So people in Guangdong and Hong Kong to be consumed with dim sum. And so their sort of tea is closer in style to things that will be stored in a fairly hot and humid climate, such as this. Of all these three teas, it'd be closest to this, and not necessarily the exact same as this. But their style tea would be associated with that. So consuming the younger pu'er, such as this tea, would be very much a newer school thing to do as far as the pu'er world goes.
Cool. Let's brew up another cup, and we'll come back and talk about humidity and storage, and give some folks some tips about when they're buying tea, asking questions about where it was stored and what the humidity and environment will have, how that will have an impact. So we'll be right back.
Yep. And so, like Denny said, this would normally be more of like a yellow color. So this is brewing up about what I expect, sort of an orangish color.
Yep, definitely.
And then we'll go to this last one.
And in terms of the duration of these teas, the number of small, kind of, gaiwan size steepings that you can get, James, is there going to be a range as a result of the aging process?
Generally speaking, that's an interesting question. But I think older teas do tend to steep out a little bit more. But pu'er in general, I think, also steeps out more times than, certainly white and green teas.
Yep.
And also a lot of oolong teas, too.
Yep.
So it's a tea that can brew on, has a lot of just strength within it.
Yep, a lot of staying power. And we're noticing more so between these two, the 1999 and the 2000, was this 2004?
2004, yeah.
We're seeing a far more significant difference in the color here. And we'll get a close-up on that. But,
so just redder, and if those familiar with ripe pu'er have seen that, probably pu'er red or black, pitch black. So the older teas will tend to gravitate towards that color.
Yep, absolutely. Cheers.
And the other thing I would like to add is that like older teas, storage of pu'er is very, very important and dictates a lot of how older teas are. So this tea was stored in a somewhat hot and humid climate, so it is looking red and stuff like that.
Right.
If you store that tea in Arizona, it may actually look closer to maybe this.
Right. And the reason why, folks out there, is that the difference in humidity is going to impact the microbial, fungal, critter growth in the actual tea. So the drier the climate, the less moisture, the less activity is going to be going on. And in a real way, the younger biologically the tea is, in essence. So if there's clearly overdoing it. You don't want to store your tea in a pool. That's a little bit too humid. But the speed at which the tea ages is a function somewhat of the heat and humidity. And
Yeah,
so Hong Kong
absolutely.
teas are going to age differently than your tea that you have in Seattle, your tea that you have in Arizona, your tea that you have in I don't know, Poland.
Yeah, Polish storage tea.
Polish storage. Cheers. One thing I want to mention too, because I think it's easy to think that pu'er, the quality of pu'er is simply a function of its age. It's just totally not true. There are 10 of 10 2016 pu'ers out there, raw pu'ers out there, and there are 10 of 10 1999 raw pu'ers out there. It's not just older is better.
Absolutely. You can have some very bad old teas.
Yeah.
Like you could have tea. For instance, I would not say this is bad tea, but the tea that we had from the 60s, that was an okay tea.
Mhm.
Isn't like a super special, oh my god, my life changed tea.
Right.
No, not at all.
Right. So and the point of the tea is to enjoy the flavor of it, and if you don't like the way that old tea tastes, in general, don't drink it.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And then there still may be a spot in raw pu'er for you.
Exactly. Yeah. So hopefully we've demonstrated a couple of different ways that you can sort of
Very
access
different,
those flavors. So
And all three of these teas are completely different.
they really do taste very different.
Yeah, to say that one would be better than the other would not really be appropriate in some sense, just because the teas are completely different from one another.
Yeah. Cheers. Maybe someday you folks will be able to drink some old tea and taste the pencil shaving.
Are you getting some pencil shavings?
The pencil shavings that I'm getting out of this.
Was the person making this Bing just like shaving off a pencil right into there for our own personal enjoyment?
I hope so. This is delicious.
Yeah. And what else were we going to talk about with this episode?
I think that covers most of the basics of ripe pu'er.
Raw pu'er, yeah.
I'm sorry, of raw pu'er.
Yeah.
For our next tea basics, we're going to be doing ripe pu'er, so we'll be talking about the difference between raw and ripe, history, etc., and doing a bunch of tastings as well. So stay tuned for that. If you folks have questions about raw pu'er and want to know more, leave them in the comments below.
Yeah.
If you have yet to subscribe, please do so. If you liked the video, please like the video. We are on the internet right now.
We are on the internet.
We are also on our website, teadb.org, teadb.org. Check us out there. James, finish the rest of the plugs. Do it.
Yeah. Thank you guys. I think you did a great job with the plugs. Follow us on the Instagrams, the Twitter,
Do it.
all the social medias. Send us all the money on PayPal too, so we can buy really nice tea that we can share between each other.
And until
Yeah.
then, see you guys next time.
Cheers.